Alright folks, with technology rapidly returning to the Wasteland through the rise of super colonies in the Walking Dead universe, today I wanted to take a look back at the history of communication in the franchise and explore how it's evolved over the years. In the early days, survivors were forced to communicate through any means they could, from hastily written graffitied messages warning others of danger to notes left behind for loved ones to find. In a world without modern day amenities, simply making contact could mean the difference between life and death. But as the world slowly continued to rebuild over the next decade, survivors began turning to the past to help with the present, often relying on runners and couriers to carry messages between communities, and in some cases, even carrier pigeon systems. However, with the expansion of the super colony's influence into the surrounding states, communication has started to resemble the old world once again, with survivors now utilizing long-distance radio networks, encrypted military channels, and organized relay systems. So in today's video, I'll be exploring the most prominent forms of communication in each era, what led to each shift in the status quo, and what certain developments might mean for the future of the franchise. But with that, if you end up enjoying this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you hit that like button and drop a sub to see more content like this. Now, to understand how long-distance communication has returned throughout the Wasteland, you need to understand how these modern-day methods fell in the first place. On August 27, 2010, the world as we knew it changed forever as the dead began walking the streets and feasting on the living, leading to the complete and utter collapse of society worldwide as first responders and law enforcement were immediately overwhelmed. That first fateful night, which would later be dubbed Monument Day by survivors, had seen most phone calls blocked as landlines and cell networks were heavily overloaded, leaving families in isolation at the most desperate of times, which quickly turned permanent as most civilian communication networks collapsed overnight, with maintenance workers fleeing for their lives while abandoning critical infrastructure across the country, presumably including air traffic control attendants, which could have contributed to the crashing of airplanes throughout America as seen periodically. No internet or cell towers means the reliance on radio waves that don't require infrastructure, so those on land may have utilized ham radios or short-distance walkie-talkies at this time, while those who were able to make it to the sea often had access to VHF radios in order to reach out to each other for help. But with the presence of pirate-like plunderers capsizing ships off the coast and the risk of hostile interception when broadcasting in general, it was probably safer to operate in silence. The federal government was notorious for being pretty quiet with the public during this time, but even then, state governments had utilized emergency alert systems to broadcast warnings to the public through radios that continued to run even after the military's failure. While the military itself at this time often relied on encrypted radio networks and likely SATCOM for its on-the-ground campaign, which would have kept working for a while after the outbreak. But once power was lost, or no soldiers were left to operate the receivers, these methods were more than likely lost to history for most survivors. These fragile systems may have been vital to the military's mission in the first couple weeks after Monument Day, but as the dead continuously overran soldiers and crippled infrastructure over the next few nights, most personnel within major cities would be pulled back to bases nationwide with the onset of Operation Cobalt on the morning of September 10th. A last resort effort by the federal government to exterminate the dead within every major metropolitan city in the country through the use of napalm. This devastating event would mark the end of communication between the federal government and military as a sort of information blackout was imposed, leaving the soldiers and civilians alike to navigate through this world in silence while the elites hid away and left them all for dead. What followed was a far less connected world for most civilians within the Wasteland, as your average survivor now had to utilize far less convenient methods of communication, such as runners to deliver messages between groups in person, handwritten notes, graffiti to warn others of danger, and markings on trees to indicate direction. In some cases, community boards could be used to track down lost loved ones, although admittedly, that was like finding a needle in a haystack. Short-range radios were still around in some fortified settlements, although they were rather rare since residents had to scavenge the necessary supplies to make them run, while walkie-talkies were more common, although with batteries in high demand from most looters, they often ended up as dead weight in backpacks. Well, unless you were on Fear. In that case, everyone and their child has a walkie-talkie with a seemingly infinite supply of batteries. It isn't shown too often, but I'd imagine smoke signals would become a common method to alerting others over long distances, with flare guns serving a similar purpose, although their uses would be riskier due to attracting unwanted attention from both the dead and living, while in extremely rare cases such as what we see in France, carrier pigeons could be used to deliver small messages between settlements that follow their migration patterns like in the old days. Although, admittedly, we don't see this until way later on in the timeline, so it's hard to say if anyone was doing this early on. Some of these communication methods may have been primitive at the time, but they were essential in organizing patrols or trade, and eventually laid the groundwork for much larger and structured coalitions of settlements. Now, as the years passed by and these various communities began working together, we'd see the same methods used in the early days evolve as courier networks expanded, with trade routes becoming more organized to improve speed and safety. Relay radio systems would expand all the same through scavenged resources used to increase their distance of communication, with communities often developing codes to prevent hostile interceptions. And in the event of an attack or disaster, shared protocols would be put in place to assure survivors would be able to find each other even if no form of communication was possible. Overall, scavenging was the name of the game at this time if a community desired to expand its reach further, with the most useful example being the reclaimed fallen satellite in Season 10 used to eventually reach out to surrounding states. Although obviously, this was an extremely situational event that most wouldn't be blessed with, so for others, radio communications remained regional around this time. When it came to herd prevention or alerts, mechanical air horns would not only be used to divert large collections of walkers, but warn others of the danger in nearby camps as well, sort of like a tornado siren. However, despite these precautions being put in place, all these developments had the capability of failing due to human error, interference, or manipulation, such as what we see with false information passing through the Saviors at the end of All Out War, or with Oceanside's attempt to disrupt the relay for Maggie's cause in Season 9. But regardless of any errors that could occur, our survivors had come extremely far from the days of struggling to stay connected. The use of hidden letters and couriers were still common, but by now, these methods were usually relegated to emergency scenarios or for those too far outside the coalition's signal radius. However, all the progress made by these smaller coalitions would truly pale in comparison to that of the hidden super colonies that have existed ever since the beginning of the outbreak. You see, while our survivors were writing notes in dirt or risking lives to deliver single messages, hundreds of thousands of people were living a life of complete normalcy as multiple cities were discovered to have survived all the way to the modern day. Those being Omaha, Portland, the Commonwealth, and Philadelphia, with Philly in particular acting as the largest and most powerful supercolony through its protection by the Civic Republic military, the remnants of the Pennsylvania National Guard who fought back against the federal government during Operation Cobalt and saved their city in what's been dubbed the Second American Civil War. These super colonies were essentially a snapshot of the old world, complete with all of its amenities, including electricity, running water, functioning governments, and most importantly for this topic, restored long-range communication systems. In some cities, such as what we see in Philly for example, full-on television broadcasts were capable of airing directly into homes, so it's presumed civilians more than likely had access to landline phones for local calls. Although, knowing the CRM, it's almost guaranteed every conversation was heavily monitored with absolutely nothing reaching outside the walls. Whereas slightly less advanced super colonies such as the Commonwealth showed no evidence of working landlines or television broadcasts, but still possessed the technology for long-distance communication, with unauthorized civilian use of radio networks forbidden all the same in the name of safety, as we see with Max getting in trouble for contacting Eugene. In this era, communication wasn't just a convenience for militaries such as the CRM, but a weapon, as encrypted radio networks, maintained relay towers, and aerial reconnaissance would enable the soldiers to coordinate organized strikes against other communities, track targets, or evacuate areas that may be overrun. For the longest time, the gap in technology between the super colonies and wasteland settlements was staggering, as most of these cities operated in secrecy. While our coalition had to rely on chance to advance their communications far enough to reach out to surrounding states, the super colonies for the most part had access to this technology from the get-go and were able to contact each other across the country without fears of hostile interception, given they were already aware of each other, that is. However, around the 11-year mark into the outbreak, the status quo of the Wasteland would change dramatically following the CRM and Commonwealth revolutions at the hands of our survivors, which saw the destruction of the CRM's entire malevolent sector who had become hostile to all outsiders and overthrowing of Commonwealth's corrupt leadership, leading to a complete reform of governments across the super colonies, with most opening the flow of information and communication up to the public and each other, with the new CRM even delivering resources to smaller communities across the country containing food, weapons, and presumably technology to connect them to the wider world all the same. For the first time since the outbreak began, large sections of America were now connected and directly communicating with each other peacefully. As we see in Daryl Dixon's Season 1, even smaller, scrappier settlements designed to supply work for travelers now had access to long-form radio communications, with Daryl reaching Carol all the way in the Commonwealth from Maine, more than likely set up through the new CRM or Commonwealth itself, which further indicates a sense of connectivity as these settlements are no longer keeping themselves hidden. There is always the risk of someone dangerous hearing your conversation when broadcasting out to the Wasteland, but with the size and influence of these super colonies, it's hard to imagine anybody could step to their strength. But still, the progress made in this universe is undeniable. From messages scratched into walls and runners carrying notes across broken land, to encrypted military radio networks and multi-state relays, communication in the Walking Dead universe hasn't quite reached what it was in the pre-outbreak world, but it's getting pretty damn close. Cell phones can be charged up once again, but it's not like you're going to be getting bars anytime soon. However, other methods of communication are available to those willing to peacefully cooperate with the New World. As of now, the use of radio waves is mostly relegated to reaching others across long distances within America, but in time, I believe this technology will advance to reaching across continents, which could usher in a new era of re-globalization. That is, if contact hasn't already been made, given we've seen the trade of walkers via vessel between France and America, along with the tease of mysterious signals coming from Europe. Regardless of where these advancements take us, the only hope I have going forward is to see public broadcasts return complete with radio hosts, sort of like what we see in Fallout. A big issue with these spin-offs is the lack of connectivity between shows, so just imagine how cool it would be to see Maggie tune into Civic Republic Radio within Dead City to catch up on what's being missed. Either way, I'm excited to hear what you guys think about everything we've discussed today. Do you think America will ever reach a point where these colonies can unite under one banner once again through the advancement of communication? Do you think this progress could lead to widespread contact and eventually trade between continents? There are so many directions this franchise could take through the advancement of technology, so I want to hear all your thoughts in the comments down below. But that is gonna do it for me today, folks. As always, thank you so much for watching.